It's Monday, October 9th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Football Show. It is a hell of a day to talk ball. Joining me to do just that is nobody. It's just me here to start off the show. We'll get to the Sunday night recap in just a moment. Scott Pianowski will join me to recap all of the Week 5 Sunday games. And what a Week 5 it was. I'm just going to say it off the top. I thought Week 5 was incredible. Thought we had a lot of great close games. We had some really big performances, some surprise performances along the way, as we always do. If you're a little tilted coming out of Week 5, and I'm sure there are some of you that are upset, freaking out, worried, nervous coming out of Week 5, make sure you hit up the People's Panic Meter. That is where Andy Behrens and I try to exhale, try to be a little more zen than Scott and I are on the kind of shooting from the hip Sunday night recap program. Send in what's got you panicked to fantasymailbag@yahoosports.com. Voice memos, videos, audio, written. We don't care what it is. Send it in. We feature it. Best ones go to the front of the line. We try to tell you whether you do need to be panicked or, whether you should just exhale and try to let it all go. And with that, what a perfect transition to Sunday Night Football, as I'm sure Cowboys fans across the nation, including the great producer Colin here, who is certainly, upset about what he watched tonight, as all Cowboys fans are. 49ers 42, Cowboys 10. We had backups in this game. We had backups in this game with like 12 minutes left to go. That's how the night went for the Dallas Cowboys. What a disaster of a performance by the Cowboys. But let's start with the positives. Let's start with the 49ers here. This was an incredible showing from the jump. And, this was not an effort where I think my big takeaway coming out of this game is it wasn't sort of, with the narrative around Brock Purdy, right? That he is a point guard. He's like Kyle Shanahan's symbiote, right? Like he's just out there coloring inside the lines that the great play caller has made for him. There were some great designs. The stuff they were doing with George Kittle was perfect. It was exactly what you'd want to do to beat this Dan Quinn aggressive man coverage heavy defense. You want to get George Kittle matched up with the linebacker. You want to get him ripping through some of those deeper zones. That's exactly what you do. That is great play calling. But the guy behind the trigger at this point, Brock Purdy, it's time like that there's no more of these little caveats. Of course, his job is easier playing in Kyle Shanahan's offense than it is, playing the damn Patriots offense or the Saints offense or, if he was playing on the Panthers. Would Brock Purdy be as productive as he is on the 49ers with the Panthers? No kidding. No, he would not be. But he's not the quarterback for the Panthers. He's a quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers. And I think at this point, it's time to start regarding him exactly what he is, that he's a high-end starting quarterback in the NFL. All of these guys that have come before Purdy in the Shanahan tree, it's a lot of these, guys who have had great numbers. Maybe they're Jimmy Garoppolo. They've won a lot of games. CJ Beathard, Nick Mullins. Nick Mullins. They have these high yards per attempt numbers, right? That is different than what we are seeing with Purdy. And honestly, and this is on record, right? You can go back and listen to old podcasts. This is how I felt about Purdy. I've obviously, been willing to raise my eyebrows at the small sample size, but what we've seen out of him is a guy that elevates the surroundings, is a guy that takes what's already there and makes it better. He doesn't just color inside the lines. That's the crazy criticism about a player like Purdy, is he doesn't color inside the lines. He is willing to go outside the lines, make plays out of structure, reset, redirect in the pocket when there's pressure and fire the ball downfield and be accurate. You can nitpick some throws. And trust me, as a Brandon Ayuk guy, there's some throws I want to nitpick from Sunday Night Football, right? Place it just a little bit better. And Ayuk, has a lot more free run. You can do that stuff with any quarterback. Honestly, as a receiver guy, I do that with basically just about every quarterback. But Purdy is playing at such a high level right now. Ryan Fitzpatrick was on the show, called him an elite decision maker. And I know there are some people who really value quarterback play that probably would push back against that. Purdy does take risks, but I think he takes worthwhile risks within the context of this offense. Again, the guy we all watched on Sunday night is not some color inside the lines game manager. Like, he's a gunslinger, and he knows what he can and can't get away with in this offense. Like, Brandon Ayuk is more productive than he ever has been. And that's not a coincidence that it's with Purdy at quarterback, because that's the type of receiver that gets elevated by a quarterback who's doing more than just coloring inside the lines. You know, and this wasn't a game where Christian McCaffrey took it over. Obviously, he had 19 carries. He had 2 catches. He had some big plays in the passing game. His longest rush was for 8 yards. Like, this was a quarterback that went out and won the game on the offensive side of the football for his team. Like, I'm kind of done at this point, you know, with the asterisks around Purdy, or like, oh, well, what if this or what if that? Like, let's just accept what we're seeing right now at this point until our eyes see something different. And for me, like, I think we're seeing a really high-level quarterback operating a really high-level offense, and like, that's it. Period. That's the analysis. On the other side of it for Dallas, for Dallas, man, it's just it's a rough beat. You know, I'm gonna write in my care don't care recap column here, and I'm gonna wrap it up here in just a little bit. I don't really care at this point about Dallas's win over the Giants. I don't care about their win over the Jets. I don't care about any of these games we've seen previously, because, like, you know, and I know there's a lot of like smart Cowboys fans that are just going to accept this. I know Colin was like, I was talking with Colin about it before we got on here. He's saying it in the chat. Like, it's almost just like accepting what this is. Like, it does feel like deja vu or Groundhog Day, right, for the Cowboys, except this time it happens in week 5 of the freaking regular season, as opposed to the end of the season in the playoffs. This is the worst regular season loss since 2008 for the Dallas Cowboys. It's the second largest defeat of Mike McCarthy's career. And again, it's happening so much earlier than it usually does for this team. But you just keep running into the same problems. This defense especially takes Dallas and it puts them in a headlock, and it never lets them out, which is, it's just so disappointing, because you should have answers. And it's partly a Mike McCarthy thing. I mean, we're running slant flats till the very end, Dak's last pass of the game, which of course gets intercepted. But it's a Dak thing too at this point. You know, I know that people really like Dak as a quarterback. I really like Dak as a quarterback, but you can't tell me that the player you watched against that defense tonight, if you had taken him and transplanted him into the 49ers offense, you're going to get the same results as Brock Purdy. I don't see that at this point. There was never any moment on Sunday where you felt, maybe you could disagree with me if you're out there listening, but there was never a moment where I felt like, oh yeah, Dak's going to shoot them out of this problem. And this isn't some like Dak referendum. You know, I think just we know who Dak is at this point, and we know the limitations of this offense. We haven't seen, and I said this a lot coming into this game, we have not seen the Cowboys play in a normal game. I think there's going to be a temptation coming out of this game to say we still haven't seen them play in a normal game, right? Because now we've seen them on both ends of the spectrum. We've seen them blow out other teams, and we've seen them get blown out now by the San Francisco 49ers. But I'm not going to say this is the norm for the Cowboys. The normal offense will settle somewhere in between what we've seen so far, like the hyper efficient, really good success rate in positive game scripts, and just the complete inability that we watched on Sunday to get themselves out of a negative game script, you know, to find creative ways to get CeeDee Lamb favorable targets, to establish a run game that really hasn't happened for Tony Pollard at any point, really. I'm talking about a massive, efficient, the run game takes the game over type of situation with the offense. We haven't seen that yet. Like, there will be some median that we haven't quite arrived at yet so far through the course of this regular season. I'm sure that's there. But for the fantasy players in this offense, it's tough to continue to project like optimism at the highest level for a guy like Pollard, who I know I have in my top 5 rest of season running backs, and I probably am going to keep him there, but it is a leap of faith. I love CeeDee Lamb. My opinion of CeeDee Lamb hasn't really changed. I'm waiting for somebody else to step up in this offense. Jake Ferguson had hit the 120-yard catch and run, but that was about it. Again, I know there's going to be a temptation, and maybe by the time I go into the Zen mode and people's panic meter and all that, maybe I've come out of this on the other end tomorrow and I've thought, hey, it's fine. We still haven't seen the Cowboys offense in a normal game. Let's not panic about any of these Cowboys players. But I just think whatever that normal is, I'm dialing back expectations maybe 5, 7, 8, 9, 10% than where I was in September. And hey, I know that doesn't sound like much, 5 to 10%, but that's a lot when we're talking about some of these guys that we really, really value in this little fake game that we play, fantasy football. So I think it's definitely a look in the mirror moment for the Cowboys, both from an NFL perspective and a fantasy perspective. And I'm wondering where that new normal is for this team and when, if ever, we might see that. And we can sit here and play the schedule game, right? They go play the Chargers on Monday night next week. They get the Rams. They get the Eagles and then the Giants. They get the Panthers in week 11. That's a joke. They'll steamroll that team. But, I'm still not sure what that normal is and when on the schedule we may find it. Maybe it is the Chargers Monday night. Obviously, we'll have plenty of time to break that game down. We got a lot to break down here the rest of the way. Let's wait no longer. Oh, last thing on this game. The broadcast at one point made a comparison between kind of like an RG3 Kirk Cousins situation with Trey Lance and Brock Purdy. Like, that's obviously the implication here. I just want to say this, like, anybody who's watched Kirk Cousins for a long time, I've made, like, I know I said this on the podcast in the offseason, like, best case scenario, Brock Purdy becomes Kirk Cousins for the San Francisco 49ers, right? And with Kirk Cousins, they can win a lot of games. Again, I know I said that in the offseason, but what's been the narrative with Kirk Cousins his entire career? Big games. He's going to throw up on his shoes. Primetime games. Oh, what a disaster. That type of stuff. Purdy, we saw him do that tonight. That's not a Kirk Cousins in primetime outing. That's a different type of guy. That is a different level of quarterback that it took Kirk like a long, long time to even sort of kind of maybe shake that stereotype. And we're not even like a full season into Brock Purdy's starting career yet. It's pretty crazy to think where we might be with this guy. Who knows? But it's pretty crazy to think where we might be with this guy in 2 to 3 seasons. I can't wait to see it. In the meantime, let's waste no more time. Let's get to the rest of the games in week 5, starting all the way back at the beginning with the fantastic London game between the Jags and Bills. All right, Jaguars 25, Bills 20, the London game. Hey, Scott, I'm enjoying the hell out of these London games now that I'm living on the East Coast, man. It's so nice to have football at a reasonable hour in the morning. I'm absolutely loving it. This was a great game. Really enjoyed it. Overall, to me, Scott, coming out of this one, I know there was a lot of panic about Calvin Ridley in the fantasy streets. I fielded a lot of Calvin Ridley questions. I'm sure you did too. He ends up with 122 yards on 8 targets. Christian Kirk also sees 8 targets. This was the type of game, though, from like a real life NFL perspective, like why you have a guy like Calvin Ridley who can win against man coverage and isolation, who can win those routes. I'll tell you, man, I was like in receiver route heaven, with Steph Diggs and Calvin Ridley in this game. But pretty impressive performance overall for the Jaguars, who beat a Bills team that was coming in white hot after beating the Dolphins last week.
Yeah, Jacksonville draws Buffalo at the right time, right? Buffalo, emotional price to pay for that Miami win, and then they have to travel to London, where the Jaguars have already settled in for a week. So this was just a setup spot for Buffalo to maybe come in lower than expectation, and that's what happened. But it was a fantasy game where, Josh Allen came in this week as the league MVP. Those odds are probably going to fluctuate after today, but Allen's an elite quarterback. We think Trevor Lawrence is going to get there. And with the exception of James Cook, I guess to a lesser extent, Evan Engram, the people you needed in fantasy got home here, right? It was a great ETN game. Steph Diggs is playing like a top 5 pick. The Jacksonville receivers all did something. I hope you didn't have to play Zay Jones, but he got in the end zone. Ridley had a great second half. Christian Kirk came out of the box smoking. And we're starting to look at, we're into October now, and we have a good sense of who's who and what teams like to do and who's in the team's pecking order and who isn't. And we're always looking for and I'm going to say this a lot probably on this podcast, we're always looking for those condensed usage trees, or condensed target trees, however you want to phrase it. Just an offense that has a condenses to it, get the ball to your best players. And that's what generally Buffalo did. I know Cook was an outlier, but Diggs was heavily targeted. Another Gabe Davis touchdown. He had a big game. And Jacksonville got the ball to its playmakers. So this is the type of game, even though it wasn't a gigantic fantasy bonanza, I think the score went under the total actually. This is the type of fantasy results that we like to see from upper echelon offenses.
No, it's a really good point about Jacksonville, especially 8 targets again for Evan Ingram, Christian Kirk, and Calvin Ridley. Zay Jones gets there for 5. Travis Etienne has 5 targets. That was sort of like when I talked about this team in the offseason, what I thought we'd see. I thought we'd see it be very 2022 Eagles-ish, right? Where this was the distribution that we got from these guys. Ridley has 3 targets on third down, 3 catches for 58 yards. Really a huge factor in why they won that game. And it's crazy too, because I feel like there's still meat on the bone for this Jaguars offense. I don't know. When I watch them, I still think there is a higher height that they can reach. And the fact that like guys, like Travis Etienne has a monster game in this one. And we should mention too that the Bills had incredible defensive injuries in this one, right? Like just a really bad Matt Milano, one of the best linebackers in the game, leaves with the cast like basically over his entire leg. They obviously lost Tre'Davious White last week. There was just a ton of defensive injuries for Buffalo in this that we have to Jones from their defensive line left. Like we have to monitor that situation for them. They do not come out of this game unscathed, even with taking the loss as well. So I don't know. Impressive performance for ETN and for Ridley and Lawrence and all of these Jaguars guys to me.
Can you imagine a day where Jacksonville or somebody else might be a full-time Europe team?
I don't know, because some of the players hate the Europe stuff, like hate the travel. I still can't believe that the Falcons didn't take a bye after doing a London trip. That was surprising to me. But then again, a lot of Arthur Smith stuff is kind of funny, so maybe that's not so surprising. I know it's a money-making venture, and let me tell you what, the league absolutely wants to suck that Europe money out, so I could totally see it at some point, but it seems unlikely that a team that's already established would get there.
Is it silly to say that Jacksonville has more of a home field advantage in Europe than it does in Jacksonville?
Dude, I don't know, man. The Bills Mafia came to that game. Like my wife was watching the game with me and she goes, did all these people travel from Buffalo to London? I'm like, hell yeah, they did. I mean, I'm sure some of them are Bills fans that are in London. I'm sure there was some representation there, but the Bills fans traveled, and it is not for nothing. You bring up the home field advantage. The Jags were 1-2 in the United States, and then they go over to Europe, and now they're on a 2-game win streak.
What do you tell James Cook managers, because he was the guy who didn't get home today? I don't know. I definitely feel more discouraged the last 2 weeks, especially today, right? 5 carries for 4 yards. And they did get out of sorts pretty quickly. They fell into a little bit of a hole. And then it was just, all right, Josh Allen, you shoot your way out of this one. You get us out of this. And he did make the plays at some times. He didn't make the plays at other times. The pick to Stephon Diggs down the field, that was a disappointing throw. He could have just put a little bit more on it. But I think he's still going to probably be a running back 2 over the course of the season. Like he finishes somewhere between 15 and 20. I think if you had any hopes that he had more ceiling than that, I think it's time to kind of adjust those expectations. And also Josh Allen gets a rushing touchdown today, which is whenever you're trying to get somebody in the Buffalo backfield, the question is how much is Allen going to take away from that to begin with? So maybe it's a case of, if you like Cook long-term, you're going to hold him. And if you're looking to get out of the Cook business, you have to wait till he has a big game and then you take him to market.
Last thing I'll ask you about this game. We spent so much oxygen on, maybe not you and I, or maybe not even so much in the fantasy space, but we spent so much oxygen on the Bills' 2 tight end sets. And like, what is this team going to look like? I mean, in this game, Dalton Kincaid, 2 catches for 19 yards. Dawson Knox, 3 catches for 17 yards on 6 targets. And there's been a lot of lines that look exactly like that so far. But Gabe Davis, man, has 100 yards in this game, 6 catches for a touchdown. He actually had a touchdown, had it called back on an OPI, and then scored on the next play. And this is his 4th straight game with a touchdown. He had 2 for 32 in week 1. Other than that, he's been like a very viable wide receiver 3 at worst. Are we kind of getting not the Gabe Davis season that people expected on the high end of the range of outcomes last year, but are we getting like a really good season out of Gabe Davis? I guess that's my question here.
Oh, for sure. It's at the point where he's such an easy play because he's in a plus offense with a quarterback who could win MVP. Is one of the 3 or 4 best quarterbacks in the league. And the usage is fairly condensed, as we talked about. And so, okay, the Gabe Davis upside we all had to at least think about and imagine after he had that 4 touchdown game against Kansas City in the playoffs in front of the whole world, right? That's gone. That's not going to happen, especially with Diggs still playing at such a high level. But so what? A player who has this much target floor, has this much goal line or touchdown equity every week in a plus offense, it's a really valuable. He may even be a low-end wide receiver too, especially as we navigate through the bye week season. And I feel for anybody who I can see how you might have gone this way. If you were open-minded to a rookie tight end and you took Kincaid instead of Sam Laporta, I'm feeling for you, man, because Sam Laporta is smashing everything in his path, and he's like been the rule breaker for rookie tight ends. And Kincaid, maybe Kincaid will be a second half developing story, but right now he just has such a small share of this offense.
All right, next game up here. Eagles 23, Rams 14. Wouldn't say it was a perfect game for either offense. We could talk about the Rams here in just a second, but I want to stick on the Eagles. Jalen Hurts has one of those games for why, like, kind of not even like an eruption game, but just like ho-hum Jalen Hurts, 28 fantasy points. Like, this is why you took him in the 3rd round, maybe even late 2nd round. But the big story for me here is Dallas Goedert finally gets involved in the season, Scott.
For sure. It's a case of betting on talent, too good to not pop eventually, and that's not satisfying to hear. But anybody who drafted Goddard would have drafted him as tight end, 4, 5, 6, or 7, somewhere in that range. You probably didn't have an alternative to play in his place, so you probably just grinning it, bearing it, and hating life. And then Goddard got off early in this game too. He got the touchdown early. He was heavily targeted, and I know he wasn't used a lot in the first month, but it's not like they're throwing the ball to fullbacks or to 4th receiver. Quez Watkins actually was open for a touchdown and Hurts missed him, but for the most part, this is another team that's condensed. So it's easy to say it now after Goddard has reinstilled confidence. He actually was a pretty good value in our redraft last week, but he could rise up to my ranking. He could be 4 or 5 in my rankings next week, depending on who's playing and who's not. He's just such a good player. We had to figure out what the Rams were going to do when Cooper Kupp came back. And somebody tweeted to me, was all frustrated that Puka Nacua wasn't doing enough early in this game. And he still scored in the the first half, early in the second quarter. And the Rams didn't do a lot on offense in the second half, in part because the Eagles played bully ball and controlled the clock and absolutely gassed the Rams defense in the second half. But I think if you rostered either Kupp or Nacua, you got the game you wanted, right? Kupp was good right away. Nacua wasn't mothballed. They obviously had trouble with the Eagles pass rush, which a lot of teams are going to have. And Philly still, I always come back to that quote you have where I still think like Philadelphia's kind of playing with their food a little bit. I don't think we've seen anything close to their best game. They did just enough to win. They did just enough to cover. They only scored 23 points. It feels like they could have easily gone for 30 plus. But the big takeaways for me is Goddard back in the circle of trust. And I love how Nacua especially, right? Because we know a healthy Cooper Kupp is going to be the lead singer on this offense. But what was Puka Nacua going to be? I think if you roster him, you had to feel pretty good about this return.
Yeah, this was one of those situations, Scott, where it's like, I think if anybody out there is like of course Puka was not going to do what he did in the first 4 weeks when Cooper Kupp was not in the mix. Like, that is obvious, but that's like basic analysis, right? Like, there's nothing revelatory and nothing interesting with me sitting here saying he's not going to do that. Like, that should be obvious, right? If somebody was willing to pay, I don't know, fantasy trade stuff can be so weird to talk about, right? Because if somebody was willing to give you, commensurate to like an elite wide receiver value for Puka Nacua, sure, he was a sell high, I guess, but he was going to have a role without Cooper Kupp, and a critical role. And that was exactly what happened here today. 12 targets for Cooper Kupp, 11 for Puka Nacua, 7 catches, 71 yards. He dropped one. He misplayed a couple of others, rookie mistake type stuff. No big deal. But the touchdown catch was pretty sick in the first half. Just such a good player. I think the obvious loser here is like Tutu Atwell as a flex-worthy wide receiver. I think that probably goes away. 5 targets in this one. He does get a touchdown, but otherwise only catches 2 balls for 9 yards. He's going to be probably more of a valuable real-life player for the Rams, where he does the full speed motion stuff. He opens things up that way, but I don't think he's going to be a fantasy playable guy, I think, at this point anymore. Like, this offense, I bet they have distribution that looks exactly like this going forward. 37 Matthew Stafford attempts, And like Puka and Cooper Kupp are going to combine for over 20 of those.
It sounds silly to say on a day where Atwell scored a touchdown, but unless somebody gets hurt here, I think he's a fantasy drop.
Agree. Last thing here, you asked me in the previous game, what do you say to somebody that has, James Cook? I don't think there's anything that somebody needs to say to if anybody has Devontae Smith, right? Because in the first 2 to 3 weeks, it was, oh, wow, is Devontae Smith taking over for A.J. Brown as the wide receiver one on this team? Well, no, the answer is no. He has 1 catch for 6 yards in this game. There's going to be days like that. Who's to say that next week it's not an eruption Devonta Smith spot? A.J. Brown is he's playing so well right now. I don't know, man. That guy, it just is a pleasure to watch. Like he's so good. And I love the way he plays. I love the way he does everything there is about the wide receiver position. If you have Devonta Smith, I know it's always tough to look at your receiver that you took in, the second round or third round if you were lucky and he has 1 catch, but there will be better days. That'd be my message there.
Totally agree.
All right, next game up. Falcons 21, Texans 19. This game was sneaky fun, man. Never thought that, I guess coming into the season, I probably didn't think that the Texans and Falcons were going to be one of my primo spots on the quad box there, but I was absolutely dialed into this game. Desmond Ridder wasn't bad and eventually did just enough to win this game.
I can't remember liking Ridder more in a pro game than I did today. I thought he was actually very good. Now, Houston defense, that's obviously a positive draw, but it's encouraging that he was active as a runner. He threw for over 300 yards. They got Kyle Pitts going, which is saying something because Kyle Pitts had been on a milk carton. We're at the point with Drake London. He's kind of become like Garrett Wilson to me. Like if you told me I'd get 53 yards and no touchdown before the game, I might take it because there's just such the ceiling is just so low because of the quarterback play. But we wanted to see Ridder play better. We wanted to see Arthur Smith maybe be a little bit more proactive with some of the passing and some of the passing volume. And we got that today. Part of it was the script of the game. A lot has been made of this. Like we're all over the moon for CJ Stroud, and I get it. And I'm right there, right next to anybody else. I wish, maybe I see more of it coming beforehand, but I liked them, and we're all to the moon with this guy. I'm almost at the point now with the no interceptions. I wonder if he's playing to that a little bit. Mike Salfino used to talk about the ideal interception rate is not 0. Sometimes you just have to cut it loose and throw a 50-50 ball. And if it turns into an arm punt, so be it. Maybe you'll get a pass interference. I wonder if maybe they should be a little bit more vertical with their offense. But for the most part, Houston, they could have won this game. They didn't win this game. The fact that their arrows pointing up, they would obviously take Will Anderson again. They would obviously take Stroud again. It's not hard to imagine them maybe being a playoff team in a year or two. So things are looking good with there. At what point is Dameon Pierce going to be somebody we can play with some confidence?
That was the guy I was going to ask you about, actually. I like your point about the interceptions. Aaron Rodgers would draw a lot of criticism from that for Packers fans, that he'd always have like a 1.1 interception rate, but people would actually like to see him maybe have some turnover worthy plays every now and again. Pierce is interesting, right? Because he just absolutely dominates this backfield in this game. It's 20 carries, but it's 66 yards. He draws a target. Devin Singletary draws a target. Again, he catches the 1 for 16 yards. Looks great, by the way. I loved the way on that play where he catches a 16-yard pass, they split him out and he just runs a quick slant, breaks it inside. I think he's got a lot of ability there, actually. I don't know when I can point to that it's going to happen. They're starting to get some of these offensive linemen back. You'd think that the quicker and better and healthier that offensive line gets, like the sooner we will arrive at the point when we are there with Dameon Pierce. But I'm not sure if I can pinpoint like a moment, but I feel like it will get better by the end of the season.
Right. And one of the big stories of that team has been the injuries to the offensive line. You just get to give them a chance to have the people they want blocking up front, or at least the majority of their offensive line back. And then we can be more fair in our evaluations of Pierce. And now because the usage is so slanted to him, that's such a huge part of backfields now. If you can get somebody to double-digit touches every week, that they almost have to be played no matter how the efficiency is shaking out.
Yeah, Tank Dell left this game with an injury after he had 57 yards on 3 catches, 4 targets. So keep an eye on that one. Robert Woods also left this game at different points, but he did come back. Just real quick on the Atlanta side, you mentioned Kyle Pitts. Big game there for him, 11 targets. Like, hey, this is what we wanted out of the passing game, right? Like, Desmond Ridder drops back to pass. He throws it 37 times. I'm not sure, though. I will say, Scott, there's probably nothing more I don't typically like to be like, oh, this guy, like he, it doesn't help anybody in fantasy. But like when Desmond Ridder runs in a touchdown, like from the 10-yard line, that is probably like one of the more frustrating things from a fantasy perspective you can see, because he can scoot a little bit, but my God, like there's so many guys we'd like to score in the red zone, and you almost would just want to have like a moment of relief that it could, and then, oh darn, it's Mac Hollins or whatever. But when he's just the one scooting it in there, it's just that's going to help nobody. But Kyle Pitts gets going here. Drake London had a beastly 32-yard catch, 78 yards in total. You'll take that. Bijan continues to make one like outrageous play that everybody clips. And even Tyler Algier got back here with, his 17 carries for 40 yards. It wasn't anything super fantasy relevant, but he was sort of starting to fade into the background. So I don't know that I can get too excited about the Falcons offense as long as Desmond Ridder continues to just look. Again, this was a great game, but this is one game in the course of 5 so far. I don't know if I can get too excited about the Falcons offense, but this is something close to the idealized version that I would like to see.
I just want to see something to be optimistic about. I just wanted the arrow to point in the right direction for once with this passing game, and I think we can actually say that with a straight face.
Ooh, last thing. Did you see the end of this game? Like, how dialed in were you with when Ritter's taking it down to the, and then I was a little nervous about Arthur Smith tempting fate, like going completely conservative there and like totally playing to the field goal. Scott, that always makes me nervous. Like, I just always feel like the football gods will not reward such cowardice, but Young Wei Koo is just, he's a stud. So he was going to get it done. All right, next game up here, Chiefs 27, Vikings 20. This was a kind of a back and forth game between these two teams. Neither one felt like they were playing to their full potential. And, that's not too surprising considering that both of the transformative superstars in the passing game here left this game at multiple times. Travis Kelce was in, he was out. He was actually back on the field at the end of the game for the Hail Mary, like in case he needed to pop it down in the end zone there. After the game, Kevin O'Connell said it's still very early to establish a timeline for Justin Jefferson's concern. I did it kind of dawned on me mid-game, Scott, when I'm seeing Jefferson on the sideline, like, oh yeah, this guy didn't sign a contract extension in the offseason. Like we talked about that a lot with running backs, but that also didn't happen for Justin Jefferson either. So I think these two are situations to watch, obviously, coming out of this.
Yeah, this game was overwhelmed by the Kelce injury and the Jefferson injury. Kelce is a non-contact injury, and you just see that and you worry, oh no, that's something bad. And the fact that he actually got back in the game and was heavily targeted, had a bunch of catches, had a touchdown, bailed out with a decent game in a game that looked like he might have had a serious injury. So we escaped that one. Man, I do not want to live in a Minnesota offensive world. I got a lot bankrolled on Kirk Cousins having this carnival, these indoor games, the bad defense. Mm-hmm. He's going to throw for like the empty 300 yards every week. Jefferson's going to go for $1 or so, average a touchdown, 2 out of 3 weeks. The secondary targets here aren't bad. But if Jefferson gets hurt, they become so much easier to defend. It all goes out the window. And what was more predictable, by the way, than Kirk Cousins getting sacked on a Hail Mary, right? I mean, I think we all kind of saw that coming. But so the big story is this. Hopefully, we avoided the worst with Kelce. He got back in this game. Hopefully, the Jefferson news isn't significant. If he's going to miss time, it's a short amount of time because, he went first or second in every draft and for good reasons. And this was not a fun day to be a Justin Jefferson manager when Jamar Chase was going bonkers. We'll get to him later. Interesting for the Kansas City offense is that we've seen for fantasy purposes what we want in the backfield. It's become the Pacheco show. Yep. But in the passing game, Kelce's always going to be the lead guy, and it's fine. He should be. But it's just it's so spread out with Tony and Rice and Ross and McKinnon and Watson. And Sky Moore only had a couple of targets today. And every once in a while they throw it to MVS. I would really like to see what Rashay Rice could do with just a little bit more activity. He does score a touchdown today to bail out a 4 for 33 game. He only had 5 targets. I think he's good enough and smart enough. He already has a pretty good connection with Mahomes. He's obviously just a rookie. He didn't come in with a lot of draft pedigree and all that. I could see a day where we're looking back in the second half of the year, we're like, oh yeah, Rice was like wide receiver 27 for the last 5 weeks or something like that. I think it's in his range of outcomes. He's not really playable right now unless you're in a super deep league, but I just want to see what he can do with a little bit more of an expanded role because I think he could become. We've been waiting. Last year, we never really got there. We've been waiting for a Kansas City receiver to be bankable in the world of Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes after Tyreek Hill. And of course, nobody's expecting anybody here to be Tyreek Hill. I just want a guy I can play every week as a wide receiver 3. I still think Rice is potentially on that trajectory.
Yeah, JJ Zacharyson tweeted that Rashee Rice saw the 3rd most targets for Kansas City this week with 5, but 8 Chiefs ran more routes than he did. He continues to have an elite targets per route run rate, with today's sitting at 50%.
That's the Marvin Mims problem, man, right? I mean, I know Mims made some of his own problems today, but still.
But Mims is like the ridiculous version of that, with at least like Rashee Rice coming into this game was trending upwards, sort of. But I talked about Rashee Rice with Dalton on the preview show, and they're getting him like sort of these quick hitting designed looks against zone coverage because he's like a beast after the catch. He's like the real idealized version of what people kind of think and want Kadarius Toney to be. But I think he's got more real receiver ability than Kadarius Toney does, which isn't saying very much, honestly. But I'm with you that I like what I've seen a lot out of Rashee Rice. I'd like to see more out of Rashee Rice. He gets in the touchdown. He gets in the end zone today, gets a touchdown. He beats his receiving yard prop by literally 1 yard. And I say this as somebody that bet on the Rashee Rice over because of how much they were going to blitz. So yeah, I just barely squeaked that one out. Was very and it took to the last drive to get it, by the way. I would love to see them condense this passing game down. I know I'm sure I just sound like a selfish fantasy person, but I'm that's not how I think about the receiver position. I truly believe that all of these guys would benefit from having like their roles narrowed, would benefit from having like more timing and chemistry with Patrick Mahomes, because anybody who watches these Chiefs receivers, like a Sky Moore, sometimes like Rashee Rice, and Toney a little bit too, but especially Rice and Sky Moore, everybody's always talking about they're not on the same page with Patrick Mahomes. Well, they're going to only get on the same page with Patrick Mahomes if they play with him a lot more, if they get more looks, more like they're the first read from Patrick Mahomes. I get that with Kelce in the mix, they will always be sort of like they're orbiting around number 87 and number 15, but I just think you're not going to get the best out of these guys in this sort of like fashion. Justin Ross gets on the field a little bit today, and he just doesn't show a lot at this point. Justin Watson is what he is. MVS is what he is. I'm with you that I'd like to see a little bit more of, especially Rashee Rice.
And I love that you talked about him being a zone beater, because I think like you win man-to-man so often because of athleticism, and you win zone so much because of intelligence, because of finding the quiet spot, having the trust of a quarterback. Sometimes it's a hot route, where the rush is coming, you have to get rid of the ball quickly, and you have to make a really quick decision, and they need to be able to trust you. And I feel that even though, as you mentioned, that great JJ stat, all these other players are running more routes than Rice, but Rice was still pretty involved for a guy who didn't get on the field all that much. It just seems like I can't imagine Kansas City not expanding his role. It just seems like a perfect fit for something they actually need. So try to hold. I know it's not going to be easy to do. October comes in, you might have a losing record, you have injuries, you have bye week. So you start dropping guys you don't want to drop. I realize that's frustrating. I really want you to try to hold Rice if at all possible.
Chiefs bye is week 10, by the way. Typically we talk about like the post-bye rookie bump. Maybe that's the time for Rashee Rice, but the schedule's great these next 3 weeks. Next 4 weeks really heading into the bye. It's the Broncos, it's the Chargers, it's the Broncos, and it's the Dolphins. Like those are all gettable defenses. So I'm with you in holding onto Rashee Rice. Let's move on to the next game here. Colts 23, Titans 16. I think the big storyline in this game, obviously going into it, was Jonathan Taylor returns. He gets the contract extension. All is well. Report hits the timeline this morning that Jonathan Taylor, they're all excited about him, but they are going to ease him in. That was definitely true. Zach Moss outsnapped Jonathan Taylor 49-10, and Zach Moss ran the ball 23 times for 165 yards, 2 touchdowns, also chipped in 2 catches for 30 yards.
I don't think they wanted this big. They envisioned this big of a disparity with Moss and Taylor, but Moss played so well, he forced it, right? 23 for 165 and 2, and Moss has not been a zero in the passing game coming into the season. Nobody expected Zach Moss to be useful as a pass catcher, but he has been. So it's one of these things where it's like, it's easy for people to just say, oh, of course that's what's happened after the game is played. Like, of course Cooper Kupp was the Rams' #1 receiver. He's Cooper Kupp. And if Jonathan Taylor had gone off, we'd say, of course Jonathan Taylor's better than Zach Moss. But Zach Moss played really well. I think they probably imagined maybe Taylor getting like 9 to 13 touches, something like that. And because Moss got some rhythm going, that they steered into that. Totally reasonable. But what I'm trying to figure out is what is Zach Moss in a month? Does Zach Moss have any staying power? They've obviously paid Taylor. Nobody thinks that Moss is more talented than Taylor. If they did, they wouldn't have paid Taylor at all. But is Zach Moss good enough for him to have enough projectable volume that we're playing him in week 8, week 9, week 10? Or is this we'll try to get out while you can? Try to go to the Taylor manager now and say, hey, you need Zach Moss. Is it get out now? Or is it no, Moss has some staying power. Not that it has to be binary. Maybe you come down in the middle, but obviously we know with Taylor things are going to get better. How much playability, I guess I want to say, will Zach Moss retain going forward?
Great question. I do think, I wrote in my column, the Care Don't Care recap. You can find it on the website.
I care.
I know you care, Scott, and I appreciate that. I think that it was easy to see Jonathan Taylor being eased in just because, remember, this guy has not practiced at all off season. It wasn't as if he was just fresh, ready to roll here. But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part, as you said, is what happens with Zach Moss from here. And I'm highly invested in this because I actually have a lot of Zach Moss, and I had to play him in one league, and then I didn't play him in any of the others. And it was only because I had no better option. And now I'm I'm sitting here asking myself, is the gravy train, has it run out now? Is it over? What happens next week? We also have to mention that Anthony Richardson left this game. Shoulder injury. I think they said it's an AC sprain. He's going to get an MRI tomorrow. So by the time you listen to this, you might know more than we do. And I think that matters only because I think if you are going to have a Gardner Minshew offense and you're just kind of running more of a traditional run game, I can see them splitting up the carries here and just running, hand the ball to Zach Moss on very traditional downhill runs. I think it becomes a little more interesting and maybe a little more, there's more, I don't know, not pressure is not the right word, but there's more incentive maybe to split it, get more Jonathan Taylor stuff in shotgun and kind of have both those guys be rushing threats at the same time. So maybe that's a reason here, as to why Zach Moss ends up with so much workload. But I'm kind of coming down on your end here, which is once it's working in the game, you don't just suddenly go away from it because you gave the guy a contract extension. So I think he probably won't be a stone zero going forward. But I have a hard time imagining he's still a clear-cut, very straightforward fantasy asset as well, if that makes sense.
The problem is, even though he's been a capable receiver this year, it's really not the strength of his game. If you could easily say, well, he's the better receiver than Taylor, then he'd have a role no matter what, but we can't say that. I guess the other thing we have to take away from the Colts, I'm kicking myself. I wrote Michael Pittman up for conviction picks, and Michael Pittman's a fine player. 5 for 52 isn't going to kill you, but I almost wrote that up as Josh Downs. We know Tennessee's got the funnel defense. Downs catches all 6 of his targets, 97 yards. There isn't a ton of volume in this passing game to begin with, and now they just got another running back to go with a running back who's playing really well. They have a rookie quarterback or Gardner Minshew as their quarterback going forward. So there's going to be a lot of games where Shane Steichen's trying to throw it 25 times or fewer. I get that, but Josh Downs played well. He's a good player. Of course, it came against just about the best matchup he's going to see all season. So how do we spin this forward? How do you approach him? And Fab, I know it's always contextual and you have to season it to taste, but how do we apply his game going forward?
I love Josh Downs. Such a big Josh Downs fan coming into the draft, coming into the NFL. So I'd be one to add him. And I get it that it's going to be a smaller pie in the passing game. This is obviously a great matchup, but Alec Pierce continues to just kind of be a very, very limited role player. I think people got a little carried away with, Anthony Richardson is going to be throwing go balls to Alec Pierce. Anthony Richardson's going to be throwing the ball to the guys that get open, and that's Michael Pittman, and that is definitely Josh Downs. I think there is staying power for Downs because there have been other times when they've opened the passing game up more, I think, than people thought. Week 1 is definitely, that's the case. Last week, they threw the ball a little more than people imagined, or at least I think they threw the ball in ways that were different than people imagined. So I think Josh Downs has some staying power here through the bye. He's a really, really good player.
I don't have much to say on Tennessee except for one thing. This was a good year for old receivers. I was thinking be a year early, not a year late to DeAndre Hopkins, and he has a classic Hopkins game. He's the target off the bus guy, 8 for $140 on 11 targets. Ryan Tannehill is a lesser quarterback now, but he's not the worst quarterback in the league. You can make a living off Tannehill, especially if you're going to be targeted this much. I think Hopkins, he's not going to win your league for you, but I think he's easily going to outkick his ADP. I think he was a stone giveaway, and I just didn't call it right. He's like the rich man's Adam Thielen, right? He's just getting all the targets he can handle, and he's producing just about every week.
Dude, this was a vintage DeAndre Hopkins game. Like, I mean, he's only the wide receiver 33 on the season. So it's not as if he's helped you a ton so far because he hasn't scored a touchdown yet. He was inches away from one last week. But yeah, there were even just some of the catches along the sideline in this game. I was like, this looks like DeAndre Hopkins in a Texans uniform, like 8 to 10 years ago or something. So I thought it was a pretty cool game for DeAndre Hopkins. And, Chigo Okonkwo hasn't really stepped up. Traylon Burks hasn't stepped up, and he's missed a couple of games here. So I think there's pretty good staying power with DeAndre Hopkins in this role.
I'm looking forward to what the panic meter says on Derrick Henry.
Yeah, that will be an interesting one. I cannot wait to hear that as well. All right, next game up here. Bengals 34, Cardinals 20. Are the Bengals back? Is Joe Burrow back? Jamar Chase never really left, but he was back in this game.
Yeah, I mean, after that Monday night game the Bengals played, if you told me Jamar Chase's target share was 100%, I would have believed it. 19 targets, but they're Joe Burrow. I don't think Joe Burrow was even like vintage Joe Burrow today. On one of the touchdown chases wasn't covered. Good job by you, Arizona. But Burrow, again, we did that draft a week ago, and people were really scared of the Bengals. Chase went really late. Burrow was undrafted. And so much of the NFL, in your opinions, can look silly a week later. It looks like Burrow's, at least on the improve. I don't think anybody thinks he's 100% right now, sharpness and health, but he played certainly well enough to push Jamar Chase back to the top 3 or top 4 of a fantasy draft if you drafted tomorrow. And man, you got to love the diversity of the routes. You got to love the heaviness of the volume. I'm surprised. I did not see Trenton Irwin getting more involved than Tyler Boyd. I think a lot of people probably pivoted to Boyd when T. Higgins was scratched. And if Boyd can't come through in this game, then maybe Boyd just shouldn't be on rosters. He chased up to almost 50% before the game was played. But the big takeaway here is it's just nice to see Burrow back in action. It's nice to see Jamar Chase doing Jamar Chase things. I'm kicking myself for not jumping on some of the Chase props or playing him in DFS. There's some really interesting receivers to play. I thought Jefferson was a really interesting, and if you're going to pay up for receiver this week, and I did pay up for Jefferson, obviously that didn't work out. I know it wasn't a huge Hollywood Brown game, but double-digit targets, gets another touchdown. And every week, and I know Dobbs was under duress this week and threw for a lot of yardage, but he never looks harried out there. I know he threw a couple of picks, whatever. I thought Arizona, and I know we've said this a few times in the previous weeks, I thought before the season they were going to be a train wreck. I just think they're a team that plays hard with a quarterback who can at least support pieces around him. So again, Marquise Brown is a guy I didn't want because I thought Arizona was going to drive into a ditch. I know they only have the one win. But they have a lot of games like today that were competitive. It really hurt that they gave Cincinnati a free touchdown when Arizona was ahead. But the Cardinals play hard, and I think they're going to be competitive with everybody. And that means Hollywood Brown, league winner, no. Definitely a profit where you got him and somebody I'd want to hold, not trade. Yes, I'll sign off on that.
Yeah. It's funny. Again, I think this is generally right, and this is generally the way that I draft. Is like I'm always thinking about, all right, what's the ceiling outcome for a player, and like, is this guy, does he have path to being a really high upside guy? I think Marquise Brown always didn't really have a path to being a high upside guy, and like he was never going to be a wide receiver 1. But shoot, he went so late in drafts that I think he was like starting to hit his floor, like where he was going, because he's just a darn good player. And I know that nobody expected Josh Dobbs to play as well as he did. And Josh Dobbs certainly, he's got some plays here that he wants back, right? He loses a fumble, he throws 2 picks, he's sacked 3 times, loses 14 yards on those sacks. Was not the best Josh Dobbs game, but he has been good on balance this season. It's kind of the thing where you said about Drake London and Garrett Wilson. If you were thinking about drafting Hollywood Brown going into the season, and I told you there was going to be a 4-game stretch this season where he caught 6 passes for 54 yards, 5 for 61, 7 for 96, and 4 for 61, and he scores 3 out of those 4 games, like you're probably actually taking him closer to wide receiver 20 than like way past wide receiver 30 where he went in the summer.
He's a wide receiver 2 now. Do we agree on that?
Yes, I completely agree. And what? I'm interested to see if he gets, and there are a lot of trade rumors about him. But I don't know. If I'm Arizona, like I'm trying to hang on to this guy and maybe re-sign him and have him be kind of like a building block going forward because he's a good player.
I know wish casting with trades never seems to work. Man, wouldn't you love to see Hollywood Brown and the Chiefs?
Yes. Definitely.
I want to see anybody in the Chiefs who's good, right?
But yeah, there's a lot of wish casting I would do to the Kansas City Chiefs with a wide receiver.
What did you make? Connor gets hurt early in this game. What did you make of DeMercado?
Yeah, there's been a little bit of like a drumbeat about him lately, like a very, very quiet one. That like, oh, this guy's impressing the team. He's been a Kind of a surprise for them. Undrafted rookie, right? He kind of disposes of some guys that were previously on the depth chart. I don't know. I think he looked good. I think he looked pretty good in this game. What about you?
No, I think he looked good. I think the offense has enough buoyancy that they can support a featured back. You would need Connor to have clear injury status.
Yeah.
To put a big fab offer in there or to start him proactively. But if he is cleared to start because Connor isn't going, I mean, and it's a little bit tricky sometimes with Arizona because they play those later games and stuff. But I'll have to rank him inside probably the RB2 cut line if he's the unquestioned starter into week 6.
They are using Rondale Moore in some running back ways, which I actually think is probably good for him. So that is just something to keep an eye on too. All right, next game up here, Steelers 17, Ravens 10. Scott, I wrote in my preview article, this looks like a spot where the Ravens should just run right through this Steelers team. The Steelers are down bad right now coming into week 5. Their quarterback is banged up and Lamar Jackson's played excellent. They're getting some guys back from injury. The Ravens should really roll here. ... But I could see this one turning into some kind of AFC North slot fest. And here we are. That's exactly what happened.
Right. Is the famous quote, was it Mia Kimes or Kevin Clark who said this, the Seahawks have never played a normal game. The Steelers and Ravens, every game they play is just crazy. And this was one of those games. Yeah. Baltimore's in control of it. Pittsburgh can't do anything right. And all of a sudden, Baltimore, a team that usually has one of the best special teams in the league, they start making all these mistakes. They start giving Pittsburgh points. There's a safety. There's an interception when Baltimore's in the red zone and can put the game away. It feels hard to believe that Pittsburgh actually won this game. On the flip side, there were some good things, and we saw the players we want to see targeted, right? I mean, Flowers and Andrews both draw double-digit targets, and Pickens, whose ceiling is Pickens and Pickett, Wilson and Wilson. I have a new rule. The quarterback and receiver have to have names that don't sound alike, but George Pickens is, I'm both in love with him and wary of him because I know Kenny Pickett can derail this train at any time. And you saw that. If you needed George Pickens today, you had that moment where you're like, oh my God, Pickens going to do nothing today. And Kenny Pickett's going to do nothing today. And Baltimore's going to win this game 27-3. And then by the end of the game, you were dancing and you were putting on your Pickens jersey and you were, spiking the football in your living room and probably breaking a window and not even caring because you're just so happy. It's hard. It's hard to know what to do when a player is this talented and this in control of targets, but with a quarterback who has such a low ceiling. And I think we have to accept that maybe Kenny Pickett has a low ceiling, but if he's going to target his best players, I'm in. And man, at least Baltimore, I know you don't want to hear me say bad things about Bateman or maybe OBJ, but I mean, has a pass to Rashad Bateman ever been completed? I guess that's my question.
Not since week 4 of last year.
Yeah,
it feels
about right. I mean, he's being outplayed by Nelson Aguilar every week.
Yeah, it's been a calendar year. And Bateman, he owned up to it after the game and was really hard on himself about it. And he was by far not the only one that had a bad. I mean, I'm actually curious to see what the drop numbers look like coming out of this game because Mark Andrews dropped a ton. Zay Flowers dropped a couple. And he also just had some rookie mistakes. He slipped. I still really high on Zay Flowers, but mistake-filled game for him. Mistake-filled game for Mark Andrews. Odell Beckham, I think, looked really good with the Rams. That feels like 1,000 years ago at this point, the way he's playing. I think Jerry Porter Jr. said, go be a family man, allegedly, to Odell Beckham, basically saying, it's time. Rashad Bateman dropped the one in the end zone, just a mess. So I don't know. I think we're definitely in a troubling place with Rashad Bateman. And, if he never gets it back because of the injury that he had, I mean, I guess that wouldn't be the biggest surprise in the world. Last thing on Pickens, by the way, you're so right to call out. This is classic George Pickens stuff. Week 1, 5 for 36. Then he has 4 for 127 and a touch, 4 for 75, 3 for 25, 6, 130 and a touch. That's who he is as a player. He's a volatile player. I think he will be a volatile fantasy producer. And they're going into their bye week and should get Deontay Johnson back after the bye. So that's another thing to keep your eye on as well. All right, let's clean up the rest of these games here, starting with the Lions 42, Panthers 24. I mean, the best bet you could make all day was the over on any David Montgomery prop and the Lions minus 9.5. That was your bet the mortgage of the week.
All the line props, Montgomery props in, Laporta props in, Josh Reynolds, I think, just narrowly beat his prop. Khalif Raymond narrowly beat his prop. The only play, even Craig Reynolds, if you needed him, he got 7 for 52 and a touchdown. The Lions, as much as they were the tinker toy before the season, they only had 2 players drafted in the top 70. St. Brown and Gibbs. They're both not available today. And I wrote about all these guys breaking rules, right? Montgomery's breaking the running back second contract rule. Laporta's breaking the rookie tight end rule. Jared Goff is breaking the rule that Sean McVay decided I can't play anymore. So I'm not worth it anymore. Maybe you can't go value a quarterback. Although Goff, you have to notice he's had very stark home road splits since he joined the Lions. So I still don't know that he's an every week, no doubt starter for fantasy, but certainly at home in a spot like this, it made sense. You get a little bit lucky because he had a touchdown run, because that's just not something you can really count on with him. But he's playing at a high level. And Detroit has the ancillary things that matter for fantasy, but they're not directly fantasy things, like the good offensive line, the offensive coordinator we like, who's obviously going to get poached by somebody in the offseason. And it's really simple with Jameson Williams. I fielded some questions about Williams today, and I don't think this is anything controversial. You need to see it before you play him. He's a guy who had one NFL catch before this year. They wanted to give him a lot of activity in the summer. He wasn't healthy. It's nice that the suspension was trimmed. It's just nice to see him playing football, and they tried to get him going a little bit. But they have, obviously, his ceiling's a lot higher than a Josh Reynolds or a Khalif Raymond. I get that. But those guys aren't bad players. This team is winning already with what they have. They're going to ease Jameson Williams in. So not only do I need to see it before I play him, I don't think he's like a no doubt guy to roster too. If you have immediate needs and you can't wait a month for Jameson Williams, I'm fine with that.
I'm totally with you on that. Josh Reynolds' roster percentage actually went down throughout the week. And I think it was because, Jameson Williams was coming back or whatever, but he is a long way away from being like a guy that you're considering, I think, playing in fantasy. Again, maybe he blows up in a couple weeks against the Raiders, but still, I think we're a while away from that.
His first big game is going to be on everybody's fantasy bench, because there's no way you can play him confidently at this point.
That's okay. Like, those are the type of things you have to be able to live with. I think if you're the Lions, you have a big win like this. It's against a hapless Panthers team, but great teams blow bad teams out and never make it interesting. And that's exactly what the Lions did without their best offensive skill position player on offense in Amon-Ra St. Brown. Laporta looks great. Reynolds is good. Dave Montgomery's so awesome in the run game right now. And the Panthers,
so underrated. Montgomery would have had a monster game if the Panthers had fought back a little bit. Let me just say one more thing about the Lions. They're on the road at Tampa Bay and Baltimore the next 2 weeks. That's the hardest part of their schedule. And then if you look, and I'm looking at Jared Goff's game logs right now, and they have all the schedules, all the game logs coming up. And then the schedule is green for the good matchups and red for the bad matchups. And there is so much green on this schedule, man. The only bad thing is that one of the Minnesota games is week 18, so you can't use that. That's not going to be fantasy relevant. But they get Chicago twice. They get Denver. They get the Chargers. They get Vegas. You get to weather the storm at Tampa Bay and at Baltimore. I get it. But they have there's so many green lights ahead and so many indoor games. And then eventually they'll get Sun God back. Eventually they'll get Gibbs going. This is, and it doesn't matter if necessarily you want the Goff part of this. Maybe you want the Montgomery part of it. Maybe you want the Laporta part of this. People are going to win championships with the Detroit Lion riding shotgun. This is a fun offense. They're going to win the division. They're going to they have in the division 30 years. They're going to do it this year, and I'm thrilled for it.
Jets 31, Broncos 21. Shout out to Nathaniel Hackett. Gets to win the Revenge Bowl here. The worst coaching job in NFL history. He's the one who wins this game. His Jets win this game. He apparently got their game ball from Robert Saleh afterwards. This was not the perfect game from either past game, that's for sure. But Breece Hall is the fantasy story coming out of this one for sure. They said he wasn't on a pitch count anymore, and you can see why. 22 carries, 177 yards, and a touchdown. He has a long run of 72 yards.
I mean, he looks like he's going to the moon. He looks all the things I wrote about Garrett Wilson. I wish I wrote about Breece Hall. Nobody could have anticipated that Aaron Rodgers would be hurt in the fourth snap of the season. But you never really know when teams say something like, okay, we're taking off the wraps. What if Breece Hall, God forbid, he fumbled on a second touch or something like that? But nobody wants to see more Dalvin Cook. Hall made splash plays opening night against Buffalo. He's come off a major injury. You worry about conditioning. It was time to let him go. And the matchup was great. For all the years Denver's had a great defense, this is a really bad defense. And man, he is somebody. If we redrafted tomorrow, he could go in the first round. He wouldn't get out of the second round. That's how I feel about him. On the other side, it's starting to look like Jaleel McLaughlin is. I know he's undersized, so there's always going to be a cap on how much he can be used, but he's just a splash play waiting to happen, man. You know how I feel when I watch Jaleel McLaughlin? I feel like watching some more Jaleel McLaughlin. He can play.
Yeah, he can play, and there's nothing else exciting going on in Denver's offense right now. I saw a tweet that coming out of the third quarter, the receivers had 9 yards. 9 yards. Cortland Sutton didn't get his first catch until like the very last drive of the game. You could tell Sean Payton was pissed at Russell Wilson for the fumble right there towards the end of the game. I don't know. I mean, Russell Wilson's not been even close to the top 3 problems on the Broncos roster this year, but it just hasn't trickled down to much value in the pass game at all.
I don't have any faith anymore in any of their receivers. And guys weren't open against the Jets. They have obviously outstanding cover guys. I mean, I'm convinced that Sauce Gardner is 6'5" with like a 10-foot reach, man. I don't know how anybody ever gets open against him, and they have other guys behind him who are really good and a great pass rush. The Jets can get home with a base pass rush and then put people in coverage, and they have elite cover guys. That's just unfair.
Next game up here, Dolphins 31, Giants 16. Another very predictable result here. The Giants don't have much going for them. At least they got a decent Darren Waller outing today. Who cares? The Dolphins are just incredible right now. Devon Achane, man, is just unfair. Like, you could have told me that they put him in a cannon and shot him out of the backfield on his touchdown, his 76-yard touchdown, and I would have believed it. What an unbelievable team.
Miami is obviously the fastest team in the league. They're just the next gen stats team of the league. The fastest plays every week are some version of Achane or Tyreek Hill, and everybody came in, right? Mostert got his touchdown late, and he had just as many touches as Achane, although Achane was clearly the priority. The game got out of hand. So Mostert, kind of got in back door, but whatever, he was fine. Waddle and Hill were both targeted aggressively. Waddle didn't do as much with his, but he still had a touchdown. Hill had a classic Tyreek Hill game. Tua, even with the 2 picks, was fine for fantasy. For all the coaches, look, I get some teams have to spread things around and have the cast of thousands, but I like a coach who's like, you know what? I have some really good players. I'm going to use my best players and pepper the ball to those guys. That's what Mike McDaniel does. And Miami's a perfect fantasy team. We're going to look back and wonder, it's going to be the trivia question. Did the Giants really make the playoffs last season? They're a dead team walk. I'm at the point now where I would play even a lousy defense against them. It's not all of Daniel Jones's fault, but I think his confidence is shaken. He doesn't trust any of his receivers. It doesn't help that Barkley's been hurt, and even Barkley healthy isn't the player he used to be. I'll play anybody against the Giants defense. I don't care if the defense stinks, because Daniel Jones, and I know Daniel Jones is hurt. Well, that would mean Tyrod Taylor would start. Now, maybe even make things worse. This team could win 3 games.
Absolutely. We'll monitor Daniel Jones' neck injury, but again, it's a disaster in New York right now. All right, last and certainly least, Saints 34, Patriots 0. Scott, the Patriots are a bad football team. Not like they're a far cry from their glory days. They're a league average operation. This team stinks. They are actively bad. Like, it's one thing to get blown out in Dallas. A pissed off Dallas team beats you 38-3. But to lose to the Saints team, injured quarterback, not a ton going on with the Saints right now. To lose 34-0 at home, quarterback gets pulled in 2 straight games. They're bad, really bad.
They have nothing startable for fantasy. At this point, I can't start either of the running backs. The Hunter Henry thing has disappeared. Max playing poorly. I'm from New England. I'm a Patriots fan. Look, they were so successful that they could stink the rest of my lifetime, and I'd take it in stride because it was really fun when they were great. But every Patriot fan I know wants them to just tank and get a great quarterback, whether it's Caleb Williams or if you don't tank quite that deep, whatever. Just get the next quarterback, because it ain't Mac Jones. And look, Bailey Zappi will probably have a long backup career in the NFL, but nobody has designs on him as a starter. And maybe I owe Matt Patricia and Joe Judge an apology, because I kept saying all summer, it's not that I expected the Patriots to be great, but I just thought Bill O'Brien gave them a chance to be competent. And man, right now, competent feels like 3,000 miles. I don't know how they're going to get there. I picked the Patriots in this game because I thought the defense would show up, and I thought the Saints were kind of in a bad way right now. And man, this game was over in 10 minutes.
And I don't think there's anything else we need to say about it here on this fantasy football podcast. It is what it is. Well, Scott, that's going to do it. This was a great week 5. I'm going to say great Sunday. A lot of close games, a fantastic London game to start things off. Quality, close games. I enjoyed the hell out of week 5, Scott. I hope you did too.
I did too. I mean, look, fantasy things come and go. some stars got dinged up. Some touchdowns with the guys we didn't want to see get touchdowns. But there are a lot of signature players who came through in this week. And I thought enough went right that it felt like a playable week, and that's all you can ask for. And also, I like the bye weeks. I think it tests you as a fantasy manager. You have to dig a little bit deeper. It greases. We talked last week about being the start of trade season. Now there's been some separation in your standings. And so I think they present opportunities to, I don't know, whether it's pickups, whether it's trades, whether it's roster management, whatever it is, you're asked to do different things as a fantasy manager in October that you're not asked to do in September. To me, that's feature and not bug.
Yep. Couldn't have said it any better myself. Nobody says it better than Scott Pianowski.
Everybody says it better.
All right. Well, I get to say the outro now. That is going to do it for us. Be sure to tune in on Tuesday where Andy Behrens and I go through the post week 5 version of the People's Panic Meter. Again, send your emails to fantasymailbag@yahoosports.com. Of course, you can send your tweets. Go check out the thread, which I'm sure I will actually remember. I will remember to do it tonight, like I did not remember to do it last Sunday night. So make sure you go check that out there. Send in the people who are panicking you the most. I'm sure you've got a few out there. We'll also recap the top 5 waiver pickups of the week. We'll see y'all then. Until then, we're out.